بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. اليوم وبرعاية كريمة من السيد رئيس جامعة البصرة المحترم الأستاذ الدكتور سعد شاهين حمادي، وبإشراف السيد عميد كلية الآداب الأستاذ الدكتور ماجد عبد الحميد الكابي المحترم، تقيم كلية الآداب قسم الترجمة في جامعة البصرة المؤتمر العلمي السنوي الثاني تحت عنوان Culture and Translation للمدة من 26 إلى 27 من أبريل للعام 2023. بداية وكما جرت العادة أرحب بالسادة الحضور من السيد العميد والأساتذة والضيوف الكرام، كما أرحب أيضا بالسادة الحضور من الكوادر التدريسية ولكل القائمين على إدارة هذا المؤتمر. شكرا لإشرافكم على هذا العمل حتى خرج إلى النور. أهلا بكم وسهلا، وشكرا جزيلا على تشريفنا اليوم بحضوركم. نجتمع اليوم معا في هذا الصرح العلمي من أجل أن نناقش معا العلاقة بين الثقافة والترجمة من خلال التداخل بين علم اللغة والمجالات المعرفية المتمثلة بطرق التدريس، تدريب المترجمين، علم الدلالة الذهني، طرق التواصل، تقنيات الترجمة وغيرها. الضيوف الكرام، يسرنا استقبالكم اليوم في هذا المؤتمر. دعونا نحتفي بكم كل باسمه وكل بلقبه، ونأمل في أن نتوصل معا إلى نقطة انطلاقة ننير منها المجتمع ونكن جزءا فعالا في تقدمه، والذي نم في الحقيقة عن اهتمامكم بدراسات الترجمة والدراسات الثقافية، وهذا أمر في الحقيقة يثلج الصدور في العالم العربي. أهلا وسهلا بكم من جديد الذين حضروا اليوم من كل حدب وصوب ليشرفونا بحضور مؤتمرنا الذي لم يكن يكتمل لولا وجودكم معنا، ونرجو لكم الفائدة. بداية نرفع الراية الوطنية بكل فخر واعتزاز، ولنستمع جميعا إلى النشيد الوطني الذي يمثل رمزا لوحدتنا وتماسكنا كأمة.
الجلال والجمال والسناء والبهاء فينا، والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء فينا. هل أرى سالما منعما وغانما مكرما، سالما منعما وغانما مكرما. هل أرى في علاه يبلغ السما موطني.
إنه لمن دواعي الفخر والاعتزاز أن نكون جزءا من هذه الأمة العظيمة التي تتميز بتاريخها العريق وثقافتها الفريدة. نحن نثمن تضحيات أبناؤنا الأبطال الذين قدموا أرواحهم من أجل أمن واستقرار بلدنا، ونعد بأن نواصل بناء هذا الوطن العزيز والمحافظة عليه من أي خطر قد يواجهه. لذلك بكل تواضع وخشوع دعونا نستذكر أرواح الشهداء الذين ضحوا بأرواحهم في سبيل الوطن والحرية والعدالة، ولنعبر عن امتناننا وتقديرنا لتلك التضحيات العظيمة. دعونا نقوم بتلاوة سورة الفاتحة، فلنرفع الأيادي معا وندعو الله أن يرحم شهداءنا الأبطال ويسكنهم فسيح جناته، وأن يمن على ذويهم بالصبر والسلوان، وأن يحفظ وطننا ويجعله آمنا مستقرا تحت حماية الله تعالى. ليكن هذا تعبيرا منا عن تقديرنا واحترامنا للتضحيات التي قدمها هؤلاء الأبطال. فلتكن تلك التلاوة من أعماق قلوبنا، ولتكن صلواتنا ودعاءنا بالرحمة لأرواح شهدائنا الأبرار. الفاتحة. في الحقيقة تميز قسم الترجمة منذ قيامه وتحت إدارة نخبة من الأساتذة على مر الزمن بتقديم المفيد والجديد، واستطاع اجتذاب كوكبة من الطلاب والباحثين والمتميزين باختصاصات مختلفة في مجال اللغة واللسانيات والترجمة والأدب وغيرها، ناهيك عن الإبداع المثمر للكادر التدريسي ومشاركاتهم المتميزة في مختلف الميادين العلمية والفكرية في المؤتمرات، جلسات حوارية، لجان مناقشة، محاضرات، وعلى المستوى المحلي والدولي. مرة ثانية أشكركم شكرا جزيلا. لا أريد أن أطيل حتى يبدأ المؤتمر أعماله، لكنني أطلب منكم أن تشاركوا في هذا المؤتمر بنقاشاتكم وأفكاركم وحواراتكم حتى تعم الفائدة. فليس المقصود من هذا المؤتمر مجرد طرح كلمات وأبحاث، بل المقصود التفاعل والنقاش والحوار. سنكون منفتحين عن أي حوار تبدونه، ونناقش أي أفكار تعرض في هذا المؤتمر، لأن المحاور هي محاور نقدية تتعلق بجانب الدراسات الإنسانية، ونأمل أن تستمتعوا بالطرح الأكاديمي والنقاشات التي ستجريها هذه الشخصيات المشاركة والمميزة. نأمل أن يكون هذا المؤتمر فرصة قيمة للتواصل والتعاون بيننا والهام بعضنا البعض لتطوير مجال اللغة الإنجليزية والترجمة والثقافة. فلنبدأ بأفكارنا وأبحاثنا ولنجعل هذا المؤتمر ناجحاً ومفيداً للجميع. شكراً لكم على حضوركم. الكلمة الآن للسيد رئيس قسم الترجمة الأستاذ الدكتور جاسم المرياني، فليتفضل.
السادة أعضاء مجلس الجامعة المحترمون، السيد عميد كلية الآداب المحترم، السادة المعاونون المحترمون، الضيوف الكرام، طلبتنا الأعزاء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسس قسم الترجمة وابتدأ مشواره الأكاديمي في العام الدراسي 2002-2003 كأحد أقسام الترجمة في الجامعات العراقية، واستطاع خلال مسيرته مع نظرائه أن يقلب المعادلة، فما نتج العام الماضي في أن يكون قسم الترجمة بالمرتبة الأولى على أقسام العراق أكبر إنجاز ممكن أن يحققه قسم فتي خلال فترة قياسية، وما كان هذا ليتحقق لولا الدعم المتواصل من رئاسة الجامعة والدعم اللامحدود من السيد عميد كلية الآداب والسادة المعاونون المحترمون والكادر التدريسي وطلبتنا الأعزاء. فقد كان قسم الترجمة إضافة نوعية إلى جامعة البصرة وكذلك إلى وزارة التعليم العالي والبحث العلمي، وإن ما يميز قسم الترجمة محليا وعربيا ودوليا هو كفاءة كوادره وجودة مناهجه ومخرجات صقل المواهب. نجتمع اليوم لانطلاق إحدى منجزاته العلمية المتمثلة بالمؤتمر العلمي السنوي الثاني لنكمل مسيرة التي بدأها الرؤساء الأقسام السابقين، وإن شاء الله تستمر للسنوات القادمة بوتيرة أكبر بإذن الله. إن ما يميز مؤتمر هذا العام هو الفكرة التي يركز عليها، وهي التداخل بين الثقافة والترجمة وانعكاساتها على مجالات الحياة المختلفة، وكذلك تشريف زملائنا من جامعة قطر الدكتور علي المناع، ومن جامعة الدكتور الدكتورة علياء الرويل. نتمنى أن تعم الفائدة وأن تستمتعوا بالنهل من ينبوع المعرفة المتقد خلال اليومين القادمين. وفي النهاية أود أن أقدم شكري الجزيل إلى عمادة الكلية وأساتذة القسم وطلبتنا المبدعين لدعمهم المتواصل في نجاح وديمومة مثل هكذا فعاليات. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
هو أستاذ مساعد في قسم دراسات الترجمة التحريرية والشفوية في جامعة حمد بن خليفة قطر. حاصل على شهادة الدكتوراه في مجال دراسات الترجمة من جامعة درم المملكة المتحدة. شغل العديد من المناصب الإدارية في تحرير العديد من المجلات الأكاديمية الدولية الخاصة بدراسات الترجمة. والجدير بالذكر أن لديه العديد من المؤلفات من كتب ومقالات في مجال الترجمة واللغة، حيث أن بعضها قد تبنته العديد من الجامعات كمنهج أكاديمي للطلبة كما في جامعتنا الموقرة. إن إسهاماته لا تنحصر في المجال الأكاديمي فقط، بل يعمل أيضا على توعية الطلاب وتطوير مهاراتهم الترجمية من خلال إقامة العديد من الورش التدريبية للطلبة في مختلف الجامعات، إضافة إلى مشاركاته الفعالة في الورش والندوات المحلية والدولية. الحقيقة تقال إنه اسم لامع في مجال الترجمة ورائد في مجال الترجمة وتقنياتها الحديثة. فلنرحب معا بالأستاذ الدكتور علي المناع عن بحثه الموسوم Translating Your Attitude. فليتفضل.
The opinion or the feeling that you have about somebody or about something. If you have it about somebody, then we have an example of judgment, حكم. But if you have it about something, then we have an example of appreciation, تقدير. She is a strong girl. He is a smart boy. He is a good teacher. So these are examples of judgment. Why? Because we have an opinion about somebody, about the girl, about the teacher, etc. It is a boring lecture. It is a small room. So here we have something, or we have an opinion about something. Therefore, we have an example of appreciation, تقدير. Now, if I kindly ask you, strong and boring, what is the result then? Actually, we are going to change what is evaluative by virtue of these two words, strong and boring, to non-evaluative material or materials. So look at these two sentences. She is a girl. It is a lecture. Can you figure out the language user's attitude towards the girl or towards the lecture? Actually, it is difficult without relying on the context, السياق, co-text, النصوص المصاحبة. Now, so we are going to change what is evaluative to non-evaluative. اللغة التقييمية إلى لغة غير تقييمية. Another question. What is your reaction towards my own lecture? This is a general question. Therefore, we have reaction, رد فعل. But if I specify my own question by opting for التمييز in terms of what is your reaction towards my own lecture in terms of quality, then we have an example of valuation, قيمة. Another question, what is your reaction towards my own lecture in terms of structure? Then we have an example of composition, تأليف. So it seems that when we talk about appreciation, التقدير, we have three types. Reaction, رد فعل, evaluation, قيمة, and composition. What are the main components of an attitude? Or what are the main elements of an attitude? So an attitude can be classified into three main types. We have already started with judgment, the opinion or the feeling that you have about somebody. She is a strong girl. So by virtue of that evaluative word, the evaluatively active word, strong, we can figure out the language user's attitude towards the girl. And also appreciation, the opinion or the feeling that you have about something. And the third one, effect. How would you translate the word effect as a noun? My own translation is تأثر, حكم, and تقدير. These are the three main types of an attitude. We have an example here. I feel happy. So Syntactically speaking, we have a simple sentence because we have just one finite clause, because we have just one finite verb. It is a process of sensing, a mental process, to borrow the idea from Holiday. So by virtue of the verb to feel, we have a process of sensing. Now we have an example of an effect. So how would you translate this simple sentence? Somebody might go for أشعر بسعادة عارمة. Is it accurate? Can you reflect on that sentence? Actually, it is not accurate. Why? Because the translator decided to add another evaluative word, عارمة, which collocates well with سعادة. But by doing so, the translator scaled up the language user's attitude towards that moment of happiness. What about this translation? أشعر ببعض السعادة. Again, by virtue of this expression of quantity, the translator decided to scale down the language user's attitude. So the translation is not accurate. But it is worth mentioning that when we translate from language A to language B, we don't translate words, we don't translate sentences, but rather we try to translate the whole text. Therefore, as a translator, you can say, I'm fully aware that I have changed, I've scaled up or down the language user's attitude, but I've been guided by the initial acceptability norm, to use the term proposed by Turi, 1995. Or you can say, for the sake of readability, acceptability, idiomaticity, authenticity that feed into naturalness, I've added this word. But I know that I have changed the language user's attitude slightly, but this is the translation. So sometimes as a translator, it's not up to you, but it is up to the translation brief. What about the third translation? أشعر بسعادة. This is accurate, but again, when you translate, you might reorder the sentence, you might add a word, you might delete a word, etc. What are the main types of an attitude? So an attitude can be positive or negative. An attitude can be explicit or implicit. And implicit attitude can be classified into evoked attitude and provoked attitude. Evoked attitude can be translated into التقييم المبطن, and provoked attitude can be translated into النغزات الموقفية. I will explain here. Let me start with that question. Please have a look at that sentence and try to figure out the language user's attitude towards the lecture. Can you figure out? Actually, it is difficult, again, without relying on the context, context, body language, facial expressions, etc. But what about if I place, as a language user, another sentence in order to have a compound sentence? Now, the same question, can you figure out the language user's attitude? I think yes. The lecture was for half an hour and time flies so quickly. So this is an example of evoked attitude, التقييم المبطن. When you place evaluatively active materials with evaluatively inactive materials, and then you ask your readers to make connections in order to have a response in them. So this is the example of evoked attitude. What about this example? The lecture was for half an hour. Now, yes, we are able to identify the language user's attitude towards the lecture. Is it positive or negative? It is negative by virtue of this distancing formulation, تعابير التنصل. So, by virtue of this so-called, we can figure out the language user's attitude. If you, as a translator, decided not to translate what the distancing formulation, then you are going to change the language user's attitude towards the lecture. This is an example of provoked attitude. And the last example, the lecture was for half an hour. So here, by virtue of the SCARE code, also we can figure out the language user's attitude towards the lecture. Is it positive or negative? Negative. The so-called lecture. Oh, the lecture, sorry. So these are the last two sentences are examples of provoked attitude, نغزات موقفية. What are the main sources of an attitude? Actually, according to Bakhtin, 1981, text can be classified into two main types, monoglossic and heteroglossic. Monoglossic, when you have just one voice, just your own voice, as a writer, as a speaker. نص أحادي الصوت. Heteroglossic, no. When you have more than one voice, when you open up space for alternative voices to get involved in the form of attribution, isnad, etc. Somebody said, when you refer to somebody, then we have an example of what? Of a heteroglossic text. نص متعدد الأصوات. Now we have an example here. The source text is in English and the target text is in Arabic. And just I'd like you to reflect on the source text. Is it a monoglossic text or heteroglossic text? Let me change my question. Do we have a process of saying? Can we identify the sayer? The answer is yes. We have process of saying expressed by the verb to say in the past, where the emphasis is placed on the completion of the act of saying. As long as we have a process of saying, as long as we are able to identify the sayer, therefore the text is heteroglossic, متعدد الأصوات. We have an example of attribution, isnad. You refer to somebody. And look at the translation. The same question. Can we identify the type of the text? Yes. Do we have a process of saying? Yes. But unfortunately, the translator decided to translate what is an example of acknowledgement, إقرار محايد, in the source text, into an example of distancing, تنصل. Therefore, changing what? Changing the language user's attitude. In addition to that, also the translator decided to insert himself in the text. He changed defense into harb, Israeli into Sayoni, suicide into istishhadiyya, entering into ijtiyah. In addition to that, he decided to add two evaluative words, al-ihtilal and al-muhtalla. So it seems that the translator decided to superimpose certain directionality, certain narrativity on the text at hand to have it meet his or her ideology, accumulated value system, sense of belonging, etc. So it is worth mentioning that narrativity, directionality that you superimpose on the text at hand is classified by me in another paper into two main types. Narrativity by internal framing, إعادة توجيه محمود, and narrativity by external framing, إعادة توجيه مذموم, or another translation, إعادة توجيه مؤدلج, narrativity by external framing, and إعادة توجيه غير مؤدلج, narrativity by internal framing. In addition to that, narrativity by external framing, narrativity by external framing can be classified into two main types. On purpose, when you are motivated by your own ideology, when you are motivated by your own accumulated value system, sense of belonging, commitment, etc. And the second type by accident due to your own translation competence. Okay? Narrativity by internal framing is something recommended. We encourage people to take into consideration the differences between the interfacing languages. They have to take into consideration the differences between the interfacing cultures. Therefore, they add here, they reorder, etc., but without changing the meaning. Now, how is an attitude graded, scaled up or down? We talk about graduation, at-tadrij, another semantic system according to the appraisal theory. Look at this sentence. She is a teacher. If it is written then it is difficult to figure out the language user's attitude. What about this? She is a kind of teacher. Yes. Now, what do we have? We scale it down. She is a good teacher. We scale it up. She is an excellent teacher. We scale it up. Therefore, when we translate, sometimes we feel it is better to say it is written إنه مدرس جيد. You feel it is better to go for إنه مدرس كبير إلى آخره. So no, you are going to change what? You are going to change the language user's attitude towards the teacher or something. Now, according to this theory, graduation is classified into two main types, force and focus. Force, grading according to intensity or amount. It is written many people, but you go for بعض الناس, you scale it down. You go for عدد كبير من الناس, you scale it up as a translator. And the second type, focus, when you change what is non-evaluative to evaluative. He is a father, non-evaluative. If you decide to insert an adjective such as true, he is a true father. So this is an example of focus. Now, what are the main dimensions or semantic systems of appraisal? I'm talking about the framework adopted in this study. Actually, we have three main types. An attitude, the feeling that you have, the opinion that you have about somebody or about something. Engagement, al-musharaka, when you open up space for alternative voices to be heard, to get involved. Okay. Graduation, at-tadrij. Now, the case study is a film titled The Fall. And let me start with the examples. So here we have an example, and the expression of a quantity, many, invokes in our mind, not all of them frame, indicating some of them do not share the same value or belief was reflected accurately. Well done. And the negative attitude invoked by the evaluatively active words, disillusion and extreme, was reflected when the translator or subtitler opted for munkhadi'in and al-mutatarrif. However, the translator or the subtitler translated the preposition from into fi, thus referring to all those people who were in the Middle East, not only those people who are actually from the Middle East. Is it on purpose or by accident? Actually, we are not sure. But when you go through the whole text, you will discover it is by accident. Another example, in defeat, this is evaluatively active phrase. The man, so-called, okay, was translated into what being hizam, ahna muqatilu. So the described attitude by the virtue of the evaluatively active phrase in defeat was reflected when the subtitler opted for being hizam. The evoked attitude by virtue of placing evaluatively inactive materials with evaluatively active ones was reflected. Also, we have an example of revoked attitude by virtue of the distancing formulation, so-called, and it was reflected. However, the lexical item men, the complex word, was translated into what? Into muqatilu. It is worth mentioning that the denotative meaning of men, semantically speaking, is wider and less specific when it is compared with muqatilu. Therefore, we have an example of translation by a more specific word. So here we have thousands of was translated into alaf al-ashkhas. So the expression thousands of was reflected accurately. Had the translator opted for ألوف الأشخاص, he would have scaled up the language user's attitude, because in Arabic we distinguish between آلاف and ألوف, صيغة المبالغة. And the verb to flock that invokes in our mind a crowd frame was translated into sara'u, that invokes in our mind a speed frame. To translate accurately, to reflect a similar mental image, to reflect the language user's attitude, one can opt for tawafadu. They arrive in groups. When we talk about the type of the text, do we have a process of saying? Yes, we have a process of saying expressed by the verb to claim. Therefore, it is an example of distancing, tanassal. And the translator opted for za'amat. So it was reflected accurately. Another example here, when we talk about the text type, we have two processes expressed by two different verbs. To announce, which is an example of acknowledgement, because there is no explicit indication as to where the language user stands concerning the attributed material. And another process of saying, expressed by the verb to declare, and also it is an example of acknowledgement. And these two processes were translated into one process, thus having a unit shift, to use the term from Catford 1965. So here we have an example of merging, to announce, to declare one process, but without changing the language user's attitude. Had the translator opted for idda'at, he would have changed the language user's attitude. Why? Because idda'a is an example of distancing. Had the subtitler opted for akkada, the subtitler would have changed the language user's attitude. Why? Because akkada is an example of endorsement, ta'zeed. And in this example, I will discuss this example and we'll stop here. We have style shifting because the language user decided to use the pronoun you, thus reducing the distance between him and his audience in order to align the audience with the stance or attitude adopted by him. This was reflected. However, the translator decided not to translate the evaluatively active word definitely, that invokes in our mind no doubt frame. So let's go back to the two types of text, heteroglossic. It could be in the form of expansion, tawassa'. It could be in the form of referring to somebody said, or it could be in the form of contraction, tadhir. In particular, when you open up space for alternative voices to be heard and then suppress them. In particular, when you use something that invokes in our mind no doubt frame. So here we have an example of contraction, but the translator decided not to translate. And also we have an example of distancing added by the translator when he opted for the scare code. So to translate accurately, one can suggest في هذه الحالة فإنك حتما تشعر أو ستشعر أن أولئك الناس كانوا يستسلمون بتردد وأنهم كانوا يفضلون البقاء في أحضان الدولة الإسلامية. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot for listening.